My name's Jeremy Lawrence. I'm from Better Streets, who, together with AEI-TPM, have brought Lee Waters out to Australia. And my job is to introduce our moderator for the evening. So, a person who spans a very broad spectrum from academia to the comedy festival, an educator, an entertainer, an academic, Julian, who invents new words like Truckzilla, Julian, who encourages us to reclaim words like jaywalking, so it just means walking happily, and the amazing Julian O'Shea.
Thank you. Friends, welcome. What a fantastic turnout for what feels like a very niche topic. Who told their colleagues at work what they were going to do tonight and got a few questions, a few queries? We are in for a good time. I'd love to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet and pay respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that people have been here for a very long time, and it's kind of all of our responsibility to keep where we live great. Thank you so much for hosting this city that we're in, who we'll hear a bit more from. We're in for a really, really great time. I think this will be kind of significant. I remember as a kid, the speed limit used to be 60 kilometres an hour on all of the back streets. And you look back on it now and you're just like, that was wild, yeah? That maybe wasn't great. And you look at the traffic statistics at the time, you go, that was not great. And I think this is kind of significant because it feels like we're at the start of some even more interesting change, and you are all part of it. In fact, if there is change and it is happening, just take personal responsibility for it, yeah? Anything good that happens from now on, be like, yeah, that was me, I was there, I was in the room when all this happened. So look, we're in for a fantastic time tonight. There's going to be a talk up front. Then we're going to have a dynamic panel. So get your questions ready. I think spicy is good. I think we should talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, the challenges of all of this. So yeah, pay close attention, get your thoughts ready, and we'll make it a really dynamic evening, because where else would you want to be than in this room right now? To kick off, we've got a fantastic guest who is clever, is smart, and is very tired after travelling around Australia delivering all kinds of talks and meetings. I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker for tonight, Lee Waters, who is a politician, a former Minister for Transport, and is here to share how he created change and led some change and some of the challenges associated with that. So please make the most joyous Melbourne-filled welcome you can possibly muster, and welcome Lee Waters.
Hello. I've never been introduced by a comedian before. I feel the sense of anticlimax is now almost inevitable. So sorry about that. So I want to talk about speed and street, but I want to root it in the broader change that we've been doing, which is based with a climate lens. When I first became a minister, 5 years ago, we were determined to take our climate change targets seriously, which is a bit of a novelty, it seems. Because it's easy to say by 2050 we're going to reach net zero. It's much harder to say what that means for this year and for next year, what change we're going to make now. So what we did was we put our net zero targets in law, and we set 5-year rolling carbon budgets. So that means in the next 5 years, we know exactly how much carbon we have to reduce in order to get on track to reach net zero by 2050. And that gets harder every 5 years. So we know within the next 10 years, we have to cut our emissions by more than we've managed in the whole of the course of the last 30 years. So in under a decade, we have to reduce emissions more than we've managed in 3 decades. This is obviously unprecedented, and it's bloody hard. And it's not going to happen unless we do things differently. And transport traditionally has been given a free pass when it comes to emissions reductions. It is the slowest changing of all the sectors since the baseline was set in 1990. And it's quite clear that unless we change transport, we're not going to reach our overall targets. And by the end of this decade in Australia, transport is going to be our largest emitting sector. And the other thing that's clear from all the advice and the evidence is that simply moving to electric vehicles is not enough. So yes, we need to decarbonise our existing fleet, but also we have to reduce the number of car journeys, and we have to shift car journeys to public transport and to active transport. Now that's acknowledged at a theoretical level, But all our systems for 70 years have been engineered to produce the same outcome. So unless we change those systems and change behaviours, both of people and professions, then targets are theoretical. So the Australian target, as you know, I think is a 43% reduction by 2030, which is huge. And I think you should all be challenging decision makers, not just politicians, but including politicians, but anybody who makes decisions about what they are doing to respond to that very sharp change of trajectory. And putting active transport at the heart of that is key. One of the things I've come across time after time, this is my 28th speaking engagement in the last 3 weeks, and I've been, I'm sick of the sound of my own voice, I really am. But I've been lucky enough to speak to a whole range of different layers of decision makers. And the common theme is, well, Australia's very big. We do lots of long journeys. And so it's more difficult in Australia. And that's just not true. And the problem is that the data which shows that is not really collected. And that is also a real problem, because you change what you can measure, and you're not measuring the right things. And where it is measured, in Canberra, for example, it shows in Canberra 50% of all car journeys are under 5 miles. Now that is true around most of the Western world. Most car journeys are not very long car journeys. They are short journeys. Roughly 10% of car journeys are under 1 mile. Over half are under 5 miles. Now, yes, some of those are impossible to do other than by car. If I have to go and pick my granny up from the hospital and collect a bag of cement on the way home, then clearly car is the only way to do that. But that is not what most people's journeys are like. Most people make 2 journeys a day, to and from somewhere, and it's not about commuting. And that's the other thing. We've got this macho gender lens on transport decision making. We like prestige projects where ribbons can be cut, where we can point to great economic activity, and that usually ends up with roads being built. And most people's everyday journeys are ones around their communities where we can make changes that would help us make the shift to active transport. So that's the general picture. We have then set some high-level targets, and I am hesitant about high-level targets because it is easy to pretend you're doing something by setting a sexy target and then not changing any of your systems to match that. But you do need the targets to start off with, as long as you realise the target is just the beginning. So the key thing we've done in our target is to acknowledge demand reduction. And that, again, is something we haven't done in transport policy for 70 years. We've always been facilitating more, this predict and provide model. Journeys are projected to increase, therefore we build more roads to cope with them. And that is self-fulfilling. So we want to reduce overall journeys and then shift modes when we do them. And then critically, we need to align our land use planning policy with our transport policy. So you need to stop building things in areas that generate more journeys. So our transport strategy, our net zero strategy, our planning strategy and our planning guidance all have the sustainable transport hierarchy embedded within it. And we now, all our policies say the right thing and are interlocking. That's only the start of it. It's necessary but not sufficient, but it's an important start. We then set up, we cancelled a major motorway as soon as the First Minister who appointed me took office, which sent a really important signal through the system. The sky did not fall in. We froze all road building schemes, and we said we need to examine the schemes that are in the system to see how they measure up with the carbon headroom we have if we are to meet this target. And what that showed is that the schemes that are just trundling through the system have got a long lifespan. It takes about 7 years for a scheme to come to fruition. And these were schemes started in a very different policy environment. They were started before we declared a climate and nature emergency, and yet they're trundling through. So we're continuing to build things, make things worse. So we've paused that, and we set up an independent roads review panel that looked at each of those schemes and the merit of them, and also then came up with a set of new rules for when road building would be the right answer. We will continue to build roads, but we will set the bar much higher for when a road is the right answer. Two key, I think, points came out of the review. The first was this concept of induced demand, which is widely understood, but is counterintuitive. particularly to politicians and many of the public, because the common sense view is if you've got congestion, a hotspot, you build a bypass, you build a relief road. This is the language we've become used to. We ease congestion by building more. And of course it doesn't work, because all it does is move the problem somewhere else and generates additional journeys, because people can see in the short term a decrease in journey times, and then that simply fills up again, because people just tend to drive longer distances. They don't drive less, they just move a bit further away from where they worked, or take longer trips. And also then it opens up land use for developments that lock in car dependency. So you have drive-by restaurants, or you have office blocks or out-of-town housing, which simply then generates even more demand for road building. So this concept of induced demand is a critical one for disrupting the way we think and do transport. So in future, roads that simply move traffic around and make journey times faster will not get built. This is a really good example. This is one of the roads we cancelled. This is in the north of Wales. So a big project, cutting down precious ancient woodland at the time of a biodiversity emergency. And the business case, and they never get published, by the way, or scrutinised, but the business case for that scheme showed that within 15 years, congestion levels will be back to the level they were when the scheme was designed. So you think of the opportunity cost of that, £350 million, the induced demand it creates, the embodied carbon, which I'll come on to, and all you're doing is buying yourself 15 years. So that's clearly nonsense, and it's not consistent with our climate change targets or our nature emergency targets. And it just happens because the whole sort of equivalent of the military-industrial complex, the vested interests within the system, the behaviours, just keep the pipeline filling up. Then the other key point was this idea of embodied carbon, which does not get counted in the business cases or in the other measurements of net zero. The steel and the concrete that goes into building the road is enormous. So that a medium-sized scheme in Flintshire would be the equivalent of, I think it was 2,700 people not driving at all for 10 years just to make up for the carbon consumed in building the road. So embodied carbon is a really important concept for road schemes, and is not one that is mainstreamed or talked about or measured, and that needs to be called out because it's adding to the problem. So these are the new road building tests we've set. So in future, simply building roads to improve journey times and deal with congestion will not be a sufficient reason to justify a road scheme. If there are safety cases for a new road, and very often, it's been quite interesting how the system works, is the people who decide to make a road have decided already at the beginning what they're going to want to do. They're going to build a road. And then they just work the system to come out to the conclusion they want. And so very often safety is used as a reason for building a road. There's an accident black spot, we need to build a flyover, we need to widen it, we need to put new barriers in so it's safer to drive faster. And actually, if there's a safety problem, slow speeds. That's the way to solve a safety problem. There's no embodied carbon, there's no induced demand. It's cheaper, it can be done almost immediately. So simply justifying the old approach through safety is no longer going to wash. There will be a case for building roads to deal with the adaptation we're going to see from climate change. Wilder weather is going to wash away roads and crumble infrastructure, and we will need to replace roads. But as we do it, we need to be building in these tests so we're not inducing carbon and inducing traffic and embodying carbon. And then the fourth one, when there are new developments, yes, you do need to connect them up. But again, you shouldn't be sneaking through bypasses or rat runs off the back of a connectivity road. So we hope this is a reasonably pragmatic set of tests, but also ones that do call out business as usual. This is an example of a scheme that's gone through this test. So it was originally cancelled. We've challenged the engineers through an iterative process. We've worked through them to keep pushing back. And this is the point, the highway engineers feeling a little embattled as people are out to get them. And actually engineers are creative people. They design, they solve problems. But we've created a culture where they simply work to manuals. Even though the manuals aren't legal, their guidance, they treat them as gospel. And simply, if they've taken all the creativity out of it and simply build to the manual, and the manual does what we've always been doing. So this is a really interesting process to get these engineers, who are sort of juniors of working engineers in a local authority, to get out of their comfort zone. And what they found is when you drop the speed of the road, so this was a bypass past a village to link up two housing developments. It was going to be a 50-mile-an-hour road. Dropping it to 30 suddenly opens up all sorts of different possibilities because the sight lines the engineers have to design to are no longer the same. The splays, the width of the road that engineers, their manuals teach them, are no longer the same because the speed is lower. And that then means you need less land. There's a lower land take, that means a lower cost, a lower ongoing maintenance cost, and you're creating a different character of road. So it's not simply a road to move traffic fast from one bit to another. It's a placemaking project where you have crossing points, you have cycle lanes, you have bus priority measures. So it's a very different type of road than the one that was there before. So that is the sort of road we will continue to build, but it's a different kettle of fish. And this is the key thing, is that our systems have been designed to make it easy to drive. And for 70 years, that's what we've done. And therefore, alternatives to driving have friction in them. It is uncomfortable, it is inconvenient, it is frustrating if you're reliant entirely on public transport and cycling and walking. And we need to re-engineer that, because people will do what is easiest to do. If we make this a punitive project, or we make it dependent entirely on people who are tree huggers or who want to be heroes, we will fail. We need to make it easy. So in Wales, 20 years ago, we had the lowest levels of recycling in Europe. We now have the second best in the world. And we've done that by making recycling easy. And then, therefore, intuitive and normal. And it's what people do without questioning. And similarly with roads and driving, we've made driving intuitive and is not questioned. And the alternative, particularly active travel, is seen as a bit weird. When only 2% of people cycle for their journeys, they are by definition eccentric and other. And then they become culturally ostracised. And if we want people who don't current cycle to walk and cycle, we need to make this a normal activity. So I don't like talking about cycling. It's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. We should be not thinking about middle-aged men in lycra. We should be thinking as fat old women as our target audience. Because when you look at the Netherlands, it's fat old women who cycle. And I think this is a mind shift for us all. We stop seeing as active travel as a middle-class aspirational activity and just see it as a normal way of making everyday journeys. I think that's a really important reframing that we need to do to make this feel less of a threat and somehow alien agenda. So what we've done is look at the wiring, and this is one of the key points I want to impress upon the people I've been speaking to on this trip, is it's all very well set in the high-level targets, but at every point, all the little procedures that go along have been designed to lead to more road building and more driving. And you're not going to achieve your targets unless you go through that pipeline and at every point challenge that and look for leakages which allow customer behaviour to revert to type. So one of the things we did was pass a law 10 years ago, which I led the campaign before I came into politics, for what we call an Active Travel Act, which makes local authorities see cycling and walking as a mode of transport, not as a leisure activity, and one that they have to take seriously. So all future road schemes have to have make improvements for cycling and walking. Local authorities by law have to map their local infrastructure for cycling and walking. They have to identify the gaps in the networks, because we know for novice users, if you suddenly go on a route and you suddenly stops in the middle of nowhere, marooned in traffic, or there's a sign saying dismount, that's going to put you off. And if it puts you off, you're not going to do it again. It's an uncomfortable experience. So identifying the gaps and then identifying where future networks should go to link people with places, to link trip generators with where people live. So not a nice leisure route through a park, but a route that's going to get people from the places where they are to where they want to go. Now that's, again, another example of an important first step, necessary but not sufficient, because you also need to address the capacity and capability within local government, the way it's designed. So we're going to design a guidance that underpins this. But there are multiple points through the system you have to police and change to make this meaningful. But changing that underlying wiring is an important first step. We know in other big barrier to behaviour change is speed. And we had a system where for about 20 years we've been allowing 20 mile an hour or 30 kilometre an hour zones to be created. So our rules of our roads for local roads, so regulated roads, they're called roads with street lights, they are 30 mile an hour, so 50 kilometres an hour roughly, but you can make an exception, you can make a case for going down to 20 mile an hour, 30 kilometres per hour. Now we spent 20 years and millions of pounds doing isolated little exceptions, little 20 mile an hour streets. Very complicated, very clumsy, very cumbersome, expensive, legal orders, and so on. Very low compliance, police didn't enforce it, and the evidence for their efficacy was weak. Where there had been experiments in area-wide speed limits, the evidence of compliance was much better. So what we decided to do was turn the law on its head. So rather than saying it's 30, but you can make a case for 20, we've said in places where people and traffic mix, which is a definition used by the UN Stockholm Declaration on Road Safety, where people and traffic mix, the default is 20, but you make a case for 30. And that is that one big change to the wiring has completely transformed the spread of the speed limits. Now, since September last year, all built-up areas, all houses, all areas around shops, health centres, schools are all now 20, unless the council has decided to exempt some. Because we know, the physics is pretty straightforward. If you hit at 20, you're 5 times more likely to survive than being hit at 30. But critically, you're also far less likely to get hit, because when you're driving slower, your situational awareness is increased, your sense of danger is more heightened, and you're far less likely to be involved in a crash. And this isn't just obviously a road safety measure, it has multiple policy benefits, but we have created a really weird system where we put highway engineers in charge of mental health policy. We put highway engineers in charge of play policy and tackling type 2 diabetes. How has this happened? And of course the poor buggers, they haven't got the chance, they're not trained to do that, they've no idea, they just work to a manual. So we need a far more multidisciplinary approach to challenge this viewpoint, because speeds aren't just about transport. Speeds are about everything. So this is just give you a sense of how big the area covered by these speed limits now is, and I think it's taken us all a bit by surprise of how much of the road space has been taken up with these new speed limits, and as a result that created quite a breathtaking backlash. The response to the roads policy, I was expecting a sharp response, and there was some of that, but it wasn't quite as severe as I expected. But on the speed limit, the response has been very sharp, and that's to be expected. This is what's called the Goodwin curve. Professor Phil Goodwin from the University of West of England did this based on the congestion charging in London. And what he found was, a couple of years out when the policy was at the conceptual level, lots of support. So in Wales, 80% of people supported lowering speed limits 3 years out. And as it gets closer to implementation, that drops. It drops sharply the more closer you are to implementation, and it stays low, and then it starts to rise. Now what we found, at 80% in favour 3 years out, has now turned into this week, we're almost a year now into implementation, of 75% against. Now that's partly because the way it's been implemented, local authorities haven't used their discretion to opt out some roads that don't make sense at 20. Roads through industrial estates, for example, that's not sensible to have them at 20, they should be 30, but local authorities have stuck to the letter of the guidance, even though they don't have to, and hidden behind that and let us take the flak for it. So the implementation has been a bit clunky, and it needs fixing, and it will be fixed, and it'll get better. But there's still a lot of hostility. We deliberately framed our communication around behavioural science, not to be emotive, but to talk about normalising it, to try and take the heat out of it. This is this look out for each other. That was an important concept. A little bit slower, a whole lot better was another one of our slogans. Because the research, and we piloted this in 8 different areas across Wales, and the evidence showed we talk about increases in journey times by 1 minute on average per journey. So very little impact on people's journey times, because most delays are caused by junctions and traffic lights, not by speed. But again, intuitively, That's not what people think. People think we're slowing them down, and that makes them very angry. And you can see some of the anger here. There was huge vandalism of the signs. And even though the facts and the evidence were compelling, this is not about facts and evidence. It's about feeling, it's about culture, it's about identity, it's about relationship with the state. And, be prepared for a backlash. And the backlash was strong. This is our new national flag, as designed by some of my fan club. And we had a massive petition, a country of 3 million people, with 500,000 people signed a petition. Now, most of those signed it in the first 2 weeks after the law changed. And my own experience as a driver is I absolutely hated it for the first 3 or 4 months, because it just felt so slow and so weird. But you get used to it. Just as we got used to recycling, just we got used to not smoking in pubs. These things take time because they're countercultural, but they do change. But it did result in lots of venom and lots of abuse. I particularly like this one with my head up my arse. This was an official advert of the Conservative Party. This wasn't just some scamp. That's UK is one of UK's best-selling newspapers there. So this has generated lots of political hostility. Some of it's been quite funny though. This is my favourite of the wittiest. And you do need some gallows humour to get yourself through this. But just to give you a sense of the level of it's good, isn't it? The level of abuse we've had. But the data, even though it's unpopular, the data is strong and it's doing exactly what we thought it would do, what the evidence suggests it would do, what the data from London and Edinburgh and Spain also suggest it would do. That we've a halving of deaths in the first 6 months. We've only got 6 months of data, and clearly we need several years of robust data. And we've got a proper monitoring framework and data collection to back this up. But overall casualties are lower in the last 6 months than they were during COVID. So I take courage from the data, but the data is obviously only part of the story. So why is it so hard? I'm coming to an end now. This is really interesting research done by Swansea University Psychology Department into what they call motor normativity. And they did this study with a sample of 2,000, a proper university study, and it's going to be repeated in Australia, I'm pleased to say, which tested these statements with people, and the wording was only very slightly changed. So this one, people shouldn't smoke in highly populated areas where other people have to breathe the cigarette fumes. 48% thought that was, so 75% overall thought that was a sensible thing to do. But they changed it then slightly to people shouldn't drive in highly populated areas where other people have to breathe the car fumes. Almost exact opposite. So we've got this inbuilt double standard of we will accept from cars and driving a set of adverse outcomes and consequences we would not accept in other parts of life. Because for 70 years we've normalised, and the motor industry has spent trillions of dollars in advertising to create a relationship between you and your car. It's about your identity, it's about your status, about your prestige. It's not just a thing to get you around. And we've got a different set of relationships with it. And when that is threatened, people react strongly to it. And so, that is, I think, a very striking stat which illustrates that difference. One other example, if somebody leaves their belongings in the street and they get stolen, it's their own fault for leaving them there, and the police shouldn't be expected to act. 75% agree with that. But if they leave their car there and it gets stolen, and the police don't act, 87% think that's terrible. And I think that there's a whole, you can look up the research, it's a relatively easy to read paper. But time after time after time, there are examples of how we are treating this differently. If as many people died in ferry accidents or bus accidents or train collisions as they do on cars every year, there would be a national scandal, and we just somehow shrug our shoulders and accept deaths on the road as the price of doing business, and we shouldn't. This is a very strange study to understand, but it's the same team with their latest research, which shows that our feelings of motor normativity are influenced by our peer group and by our environment. It's not a national culture issue. So levels of motor normativity are higher in parts of the Netherlands than they are in America, for example. So it's not some kind of some national construct. This is about your local environment and the attitudes of those who are around you. And again, it's back to ease. Because we've made driving easy and alternatives difficult in those communities, it is therefore othered. And so it's there's definitely a cycle here, and we need to do this for me is the key point. We've just got to make it easy, and we've got to re-engineer all our system. We've got to look at our wirings. Why have we got car parking standards for new housing developments? As you say, you should have not only guaranteed car parking for every house, but a covered car parking. What's that about? Why is that? You can look at almost every little area of regulation and guidance. There's these bits of motor normativity bias built in all the time, which compound the behaviour and makes the targets by themselves meaningless unless those system changes are then followed through with. So one of the key ones for me was the appraisal guidance that's used to judge transport projects. This is really nerdy in the wiring territory, but this is what makes the difference. So when you build a transport scheme, you have to measure journey time savings. So if a scheme is said to reduce an average journey by 1 or 2 minutes, which is typically what most very large highway schemes achieve, the Treasury comes up with a number which says each one of those minutes is worth X to the productivity of the economy, because it's assumed that in that extra minute you're going to do something useful for the economy, and that's measured. And it then says, okay, well, if there are, 500,000 journeys on this road a year, we'll multiply X by 500,000, then we'll multiply it again by 30 over the course, which is the period of the scheme, and then suddenly you've got a project which generates 2 billion extra for the economy, and it's bollocks. But that's what the transport formula says, and that's what the law says you have to follow. And so politicians come in and see these scheme proposals and say, this scheme will generate 2 billion for the economy. Why wouldn't you do that? That's great. It helps productivity. And so, it's biased. It's been completely gerrymandered ideologically to get you the same outcome it's always got you. And it's those sort of things that need to be challenged. So in our new guidance, we say that if a scheme does not meet government policy objectives, it cannot be seen to be value for money. And the policy objectives include net zero and include modal shift targets. So that cannot be used as a justification for building road schemes in the future. We say you cannot count journey time savings by themselves as a sufficient reason for going ahead with the scheme. For large schemes where journey time savings are relevant, as part of the things you consider, you have to publish the impact with the journey times and without the journey times. You can make a more rounded judgment. And when you are measuring journey times, you have to break it down into journey times savings of up to 2 minutes, 2 and 5 minutes, 5 and 10. Because what that'll show is almost every scheme will only deliver tiny amounts of journey time savings, which, as we've seen from the graph earlier from that Flintshire scheme in North Wales that we cancelled, those journey time savings are completely reversed within 15 years in any event, because just extra traffic appears. But it's that level of analysis that does not often get challenged or scrutinised, because those studies aren't published, and it goes counter-intuitively to what we've been trained to think, that new road schemes ease congestion. So our whole system is biased and is being built to keep giving us the same outcomes. And that's fine, unless you want to meet our carbon targets. And, the scientists, so I think, are probably some of the most conservative, dullest people you'll come across. In terms of the use of language, important qualifier, they're very careful in the language they use, but when the world scientists are talking about catastrophic climate change, then we have to act. And there's no good just setting targets. We've got to break those targets down to what they mean for this year and next year. We're going to follow those targets through with changes to the wiring, so we're not allowing all behaviours to reassess, and we also need to change our behaviours and attitudes. And speeds is one of the key things that can do that. My final slide is I get some satisfaction from this. This is a trajectory of a fighter jet. And if you change the trajectory of a fighter jet by just 1 degree, over the course of a minute, it ends up 60 miles off target from where it would have done had you not changed the course by a degree. So this is hard and this is daunting and this is unpopular politically and very, very, very testing. But by making lots of little changes, we will end up in a different place than we otherwise would have done. I've written, this is a little farewell gift from my social media fan base, but this is a link to, I've written all this stuff up in a lot more detail, so if you are interested in the detail of what we've done, then that's online, and I'm on LinkedIn and can be reached if you've got any follow-ups. But thank you very much. That's me for now.